Hey guys, welcome back to FATBOSS TV. Today we're looking at the King Rastakhan encounter in the Battle of Dazar'alor raid instance.
So this 4-phase encounter is a pretty long one, but it is repetitive and doesn't have too many changes between each phase. Now before we get into this video, we should say that this boss has changed a little since we last tested it, so we don't have footage showing every new mechanic or change that has been done to the fight, but we'll cover all of that at the end of the video, and what we do show you should be relevant and will help you when you start this fight in a few weeks' time. Anyway, with that said, let's jump straight in.
So the fight starts off with Rastakhan and his 3 adds. Now whenever you deal damage to Rastakhan during this phase, it will deal damage to the adds instead, spread equally amongst them. We opted to tank Rastakhan far from the raid on one side of the room, just on one of the tanks, and have the other tank keep the 3 adds with the raid. This is for 3 reasons. 1, throughout this phase, Rastakhan will spawn serpent totems. These will always spawn within around 5 yards of Rastakhan and simply cast a large fire breath at a random player. However, if no one is within range of it, it will simply cast it on the tank, and the tank can just sidestep it, which completely removes the totem from the encounter for everyone else. By the end of the phase, you'll have a shitload of them up, but they despawn the moment phase 2 starts. The second reason is that the boss will cast Scorching Detonation on the tank. This channel deals a small amount of ticking damage over its duration and then causes you to explode at the end of it, and this last explosion deals large drop-off damage to the entire raid. By already being far from the raid, this damage is minimized without you even needing to move. And the third and final reason is the Plague of Toads cast. The boss will target a random player and send toads out in 3 separate lines, leaving puddles in their wake. If you're hit by a toad, you take a nasty 12-second dot. The puddles just deal ticking damage. By having the boss far from the raid, you have all the time in the world to react to them, and for the most part, they barely even make it towards you. So as you can see, tanking him far from the raid and having a healer or 2 move in and out of range just to keep him topped up for the first phase is a really powerful strategy.
Let's talk about the adds. Prelate Zalan will fixate a beam on a random player that will chase them down. This deals a pretty nasty amount of damage if you're caught within it, so you got to be quick to kite away from the raid whilst everyone else just dodges it. Headhunter Galwana debuffs random people with Grievous Axe. This deals an initial burst of damage and will tick endlessly until the player is healed above 90% health, at which point it will be removed. So healers, you need to watch out for these debuffs and just top them up as soon as possible. Siegebreaker Roka is the biggest threat out of the 3 adds. On a timer, he'll cast Meteor Leap at a random player. This deals a lethal amount of nature damage to that player. It is, however, split between all players within 8 yards, so you'll want the entire raid to stack up just to save the player. One thing to note about this ability is that it will overlap to the exact second with Rastakhan's tank debuff exploding. For this overlap, you pretty much have to use raid-wide damage reductions just to make it safe. Now since the first heroic testing, Crushing Leap has also entered the dungeon journal. This makes Roka deal a burst of damage to the tank immediately after the Meteor Leap and apply a debuff that increases the amount of damage you take from that ability by 500%. This doesn't necessarily completely stop you from doing the strategy you see on screen now. You might just need either DPS to taunt and take a hit with externals, you might be able to just bop off the stacks, and ultimately if none of that works for you, you can just tank swap on Siegebreaker Roka across the room and wait for your stack to drop, which isn't ideal, but in theory it would work. We did mythic testing with this ability in play and did the exact same strategy you see now, and instead just stacked cooldowns on the tank and it worked perfectly fine. Anyway, once all those 3 adds are dead, phase 2 will begin with Bonsamdi coming down from his throne.
Now the moment Bonsamdi spawned, we took him to the side of the room where Rastakhan was during phase 1. This is because of his aura of death. This applies a stacking dot to all players within 30 yards, which you really do not want stacking on the raid. Bonsamdi is also absorbing all damage in this phase, so it's completely pointless to attack him, so there isn't any need to have him anywhere near the raid anyway. Whilst tanking him, you will be hit by Caress of Death on a timer. This debuff deals ticking shadow damage whilst making you healing immune for 5 seconds. You want to make sure you have something up every time this ability comes in, as otherwise you may die. Rastakhan throughout this phase will still be casting Scorching Detonation on the other tank. Every time this is cast, we used it as an opportunity to tank swap. That way the explosion was far from the raid, and at the same time, it gave the chance for the Bonsamdi tank to drop his Aura of Death stacks. Rastakhan will still be doing his Plague of Toads. This is a bit more of an issue now as the raid is closer to him. You just got to keep a close eye on him and see which direction he's sending them out. Rastakhan has also got 2 new mechanics. On a timer, he'll spawn a Zombie Dust totem. This will mind control players until it's destroyed. DPS must swap to it immediately whenever it spawns, as the mind control player is likely to begin wasting CDs without them being able to do anything about it. Last to be wary of is the Plague of Fire. This ability targets random players, typically ranged, dealing a burst of fire damage before attempting to spread to any other player within 7 yards. By being pre-spread, this ability is not really an issue. This however isn't easy for melee. Just be ready to run and spread if this somehow bounces into melee, as otherwise you're just going to kill each other very quickly. Last to mention for this phase is the Death Storm mechanic. This is a dot applied to a random player, and when it expires 8 seconds later, it will spawn a death rift at their location. This rift you'll be using during phase 3. We try to place these rifts towards Bwonsamdi. The moment you get Rastakhan to 60% health, Bwonsamdi will teleport the nearest half of the raid to himself and bring them into the Dead Realm. You want to try your best to get the majority of your DPS so they are closest, as well as a couple of healers down there. Whilst testing, we found that having a tank downstairs really wasn't needed. We're pretty sure on live it won't be needed either. In this Dead Realm, you can now begin to deal damage to Bwonsamdi. This phase ends the moment he hits 50%, so you want to get him down fast so that the raid can reunite. Now Bwonsamdi will spam cast Caress of Death on random players instead of melee hitting. This is similar to the phase 2 version, except it just deals a little bit less damage. Dread Reaping Shards will move around the room, and getting hit by this deals ticking damage to you, so you've got to avoid them. If they hit a rift, they will go into the Living Realm. This wasn't working properly on Heroic, but it was present on the Mythic testing. He'll also cast Inevitable End. This will deal a lethal amount of damage if you're stood within the large targeting circle around him at the end of the cast. Be sure to move early, otherwise the pull-in effect that happens beforehand might catch you out. Now the issue to deal with, aside all of that, is that you'll be gaining a stacking dot, and this dot is removed by going into one of the rifts that you placed during phase 2. Doing so will, however, deal a small burst of damage to the entire raid, so you've got to be careful to do it in a staggered fashion. If you reset all at the same time, you could collectively one-shot everyone.
Meanwhile, in the Living Realm, Rastakhan has stopped his Plague of Fires and Toads, but still has the Scorching Detonation on the tank and the Zombie Totem. He'll also be gaining a stacking damage increase every 15 seconds. He'll also call 3 new adds to fight alongside him. The Phantom of Retribution frequently casts Gravebolt. This just deals a burst of damage in the tank, but more importantly will also cast Seal of Bwonsamdi. This will spawn multiple zones throughout the room that need to be soaked, or they'll explode, dealing damage to anyone within 40 yards of them. The Phantom of Slaughter will also cast Gravebolt, but also has a focused demise channel. This deals damage over its 5-second cast on a random player and deals a pretty large amount of damage. It can be interrupted, but only by the player that it is targeted on. As for the Phantom Rage, he deals large melee damage and also has a single cast, Shadow Smash. This ability deals shadow damage in a cone in front of him and debuffs players with a 75% healing taken reduction for 8 seconds. Now whilst testing, the Rage would always move with the tank with this cast, however monks could simply chi torpedo out of it at the last second. This meant we never needed to tank swap. So we had one tank with Rastakhan and the other 2 adds, whilst the monk cheesed the Phantom of Rage away from the rest of the raid. One thing to mention also while we were testing, if any of the adds died, they would respawn in the Dead Realm, just like the Desolate Host fight in Tomb of Sargeras. We just tried our best not to kill any of the adds to stop that from happening, and it worked pretty well. But since testing, this mechanic only appears to be in the Mythic Dungeon Journal, so you might not even need to worry about it at all. So whilst the guys in the Dead Realm do their thing and begin to damage Bwonsamdi down to 50% health, the Living Realm people just do their best to stay alive, kill off the totems, and don't kill off any of the adds. And when Bwonsamdi finally does hit 50% health, the raid is reunited in the Living Realm and the last phase begins. And it's at this point where we did decide to kill off any of the remaining adds. After the adds are dead, you'll have just Rastakhan to deal with. He'll still cast Caress of Death on the tanks, you'll need to continue to dodge the frogs as well as deal with the Plague of Fire, and Death Doors will continue to spawn from players. What's new in this phase is that he will cast Inevitable End just like you saw from Bwonsamdi in phase 3. Again, you've just got to make sure that you move away from him because if you are caught at the end of the cast, you will be instantly killed. And that was it for this phase. As you can see, it's the easiest phase by a mile while we were testing, but that is with one mechanic not working correctly. In this last phase, we're guessing that you're going to get increasing amounts of Dread Reaping Shards coming from the Dead Realm as more and more doors are opened, which might actually act as a bit of a pseudo-enrage as the room will become more and more populated with them, giving you far less room to actually dodge them. This footage you see on screen now is actually from the early stages of Phase 3 in Mythic, and as you can see, there is already a shitload of them. But that's the fight, what do we think?
So of course we can only show you what we saw of the encounter, but we should definitely mention that there has been multiple changes to the Dungeon Journal since we've tested it, so what version of the fight we'll see in a few weeks, we're not totally sure. The changes themselves do not appear to change the fight too much, but the 2 most important ones to note is that the adds in Phase 3 look like they can be crowd controlled, but only for 60 seconds, at which point they become immune, so you might just trap them or whatever and just leave them at the side for 60 seconds, and hopefully the Bwonsamdi group is already back up by then. How this affects the fight entirely though, of course, we're not too sure. And the second change is that the boss in Phase 4 gains all-encompassing death, which creates a bunch of death rifts around him. This is either just going to be a way of making, loads of Dread Reaping shards to come into the room, as you said beforehand, or it could be maybe, like an end death sort of mechanic, where it's just like, oh, I'm dying, and like, at 10% loads of fucking death rifts appear, and you've got to survive whilst the boss is RPing or something like that. Because we did actually kill this guy. Well, by killing him, I mean get him to 1 HP, and he just wouldn't drop any lower.
Yeah.
So maybe there is supposed to be some sort of cinematic that obviously wasn't triggering because it's PTR testing. But as for the general feedback for the fight, it does feel that the strategy counters this fight maybe a little bit too much in Phase 1, just being able to tank the boss really far away, allowing the rest of the raid just to kind of nuke the ads. Seems like a little bit of an oversight, and the crush stack on the tank from the Siege Breaker ad alone doesn't really seem to be enough to stop you from using it. However, of course, the downside of using that entire strat is that the ads are going to take longer to die.
Yeah, because you can't cleave from the boss to increase the amount of damage that's also going on the ads, because of course the boss doesn't take any damage. All the damage the boss takes goes on the ads instead. But overall, it might actually be a damage increase because, well, people don't have to swap to the totem, and they don't have to move from the totem.
Yeah, in theory, yeah.
Kind of hard to gauge exactly what the best strategy is. But in terms of just playing it safe, this 100% is the easiest strategy.
Another thing is that Phase 2 does feel slightly too long, and maybe the health percentages could be adjusted to fix that. Like, once you've got control of the phase and the tanks are actually doing their tank swap, and, you're just keeping on top of the toads and you're killing the totems and you're not spreading the plague everywhere, like, a lot of the phase could be just stood completely still nuking the boss. And, yeah, it's a little bit dull in that sort of sense.
Yep. One thing I'd say is the Phase 3 transition could be a lot clearer. It's kind of hard to work out exactly who's going down into the Dead Realm, and you're not given that much time to position to adjust it unless you do it way before the transition even happens, which I think for a heroic boss is going to be rough for some guilds. They really should increase that transition time by a couple of seconds just to compensate for that. To add, if they really didn't want to do that, they should add some form of failsafe, I think. I mean, if you fuck up and accidentally send down a tank, it's pretty much a wipe, because you kind of need 2 tanks upstairs, because you need to either taunt swap on that ad, or otherwise you're going to have your monk kiting all of the ads all over the room, which isn't ideal. So there should be a way of re-entering the living realm while you're down there, and you can be punished for that. I mean, I understand that, you fucked up, you shouldn't be down there, but you shouldn't just flat out wipe. Make it so that maybe that person can interact with, like, I don't know, a gravestone or some shit, puts a debuff on them, makes it so they, they take less healing, or they deal less damage, or they get a nasty dot on them.
Yeah.
But just some way of them getting back into the living realm, I think is a good idea.
Even just say on normal and heroic mode, the punishment itself is you have one less person down there who should be there, which is a punishment in of itself, because, you need to get Bonsandi down as soon as possible. We were lusting for that every single time, because you just want to make sure the aura of death stacks just don't keep getting too high.
Well, also, you just have to kill him anyway to even progress with the rest of the fight.
That's very true, yeah.
Another way around all of this is just designing the transition to not take the closest half of the raid, but instead take set people. Just grab a fair, fixed ratio of healers and DPS to take down.
Well, you could do it like that, although it does take away the choice aspect of it, and I personally like that part of it. But yeah, aside from, of course, the Dread Reaping shards not working properly in the last phase, which definitely made it anticlimactic, I can imagine if in that last phase you're going to get loads of shards going in and out of the raid.
If it works how we think it is,
it's going to be so scary. It's going to be awesome. But yeah, this fight has got loads of positive things. There's just a couple of niggly bits that we've just gone over. But overall, I think it's a solid encounter. I really enjoyed testing it, and hopefully it's just as kick-ass when it hits live service.
But that's all we've got time for, guys. If you enjoyed this little boss preview, show us some love, give us a like. It helps us out a lot. And we will catch you all in the next one.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.